Hi and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah. I'm here with Knitting Natter to help you knit with ease, confidence and joy. And we are talking about the knit along again. This will help you for more than just my knit along. We're talking about substituting yarn. If you're joining a knit along and you can't get a hold of the original, or you just want to have a look in your stash instead, I'll just go through a few things to let you know what we're doing today. We are talking about the details of the yarn that we are using in this knit along. I'm also going to just give you a few ideas about where you might find that worldwide. As I record this, there are only 2 kits left, so most of you from now on will be getting the digital pattern. And that means that you can source your own yarn, you can choose your own colours, but it also means that you may well be able to look in your stash and see which yarn you can find to knit with instead of using the original. The next thing we're going to talk about is the most important things to be aware of when you are substituting yarn. I will go through various things that will help you, but then I will particularly highlight the most important ones. Also, I will give you some suggestions on where you can find help online to substitute very specific yarns. Of course, I'm going to help you today with this one, but if you'd like to get more advice maybe about which yarn is in your stash, then I'll give you some of those details later as well. Okay, so let's first talk about which yarn we're using for this knit along. Of course, we are using the Rowan Felted Tweed DK yarn for knitting this rainbow cows. We're using 3 colours, so we need 50 grams of each, and that is bilberry, sea salter and pine in this one. But there are also other combinations that I've suggested. By all means, go and have a look at the listing over in the shop, and I will keep those colourways on there, just the suggestions. Take a look and see if you can get some inspiration, or even pick one of those colourways when you're choosing your own yarn. We are knitting with DK yarn, which can also be known as number 3 light. It can be known as light worsted. It can be known as 8 ply around the world, depending on where you are. Rowan does also make, in the same colours and in the same fibres, Rowan Tweed Aran. So just make sure that you're getting the right one if you do want to go out and source your own colours yourself. When we're knitting with this, you will see small flecks of different colours. It's called a tweed yarn, but it's not particularly bobbly. You don't see those colours as bobbles or boucles or anything like that. The tweed is spun into the yarn, so it feels very easy to knit with, and you're not going to have an uneven knit. All of the stitches are even because it's an even yarn. The fibre we're knitting with is wool, alpaca and viscose. And the viscose is from wood pulp, from a sustainable wood pulp. It's a mixture. Mixtures can be sometimes helpful. It means that the yarn is more sturdy. The needle we're using, now this is against what the manufacturer says here. On the label you will find that it says 3.75 to 4mm needles. For the cowl that we're knitting, I've chosen a larger needle. We're knitting with 4.5mm needles, that are 100 centimetres long. And for the very reason that I wanted a looser drape. It's just going to give us a slightly looser drape. It's not going to be as dense as we wear it. For the looser fabric, the larger needle is what's going to give us that effect. And yes, I've already mentioned this, the density. The density can, the clue can be sometimes there with the length of yarn per ball. This is a 50 gram ball and you're getting 191 metres. That gives a thin DK yarn. The clue is also there from the fact that you're using 3.75 to 4mm. A lot of DK yarns will suggest 4mm, but it's just a thinner one of the DKs than I've come across, and I actually really like it. But the density clue is there with the length of the yarn per ball. So find it as near as possible if you're looking at a different yarn. Otherwise it will be a heavier yarn for every stitch that you knit. And then the drape of the fabric won't be quite the same. So the most important of them, we're looking at, now this is the interesting one, I haven't mentioned it yet, is the gauge. I would look for a yarn that matches the gauge on the label for this, because then you know that you're getting a very similar yarn. This suggests it will knit 22 to 24 stitches and 30 to 32 rows. You don't have to sit there and knit multiple swatches up with lots of different yarns, but if you read on the label that it's a similar size, the stitches are most important. The stitches are most important. You can adjust the number of rows you do if you're knitting something, but you can't adjust the number of stitches once you've started knitting. And the size of the stitches will make a massive difference compared to the size of the rows. So yes, definitely look at the gauge for the stitches most importantly. The next one, I really do think the fibre can be quite important because it will give you a completely different feel. If, for example, you're knitting with a cotton, it will be a heavier yarn, it will be lighter in the form that it will feel cooler when you're wearing it. So it will just be a completely different feel when you're knitting it. And like I said, the density is important with the measurements. And yes, of course, knit with a DK. Don't go out and say, oh, the fiber's the same, I'm going to use the same size needles. But then you look at it and you say, oh, it's a chunky yarn. Oh, that's fine, it doesn't matter. Well, it will matter because we're knitting with a DK yarn. So you'll have a completely different size cowl once you've finished. It will be down to your knees, very likely. And you'll need a longer needle. Right, so the next point is, where can you get this yarn around the world? Of course, I do post to the UK, I post to the US, to Canada, to Australia, but there's only so much time left before the kits go out. So where can you find this particular yarn? Everywhere else in the world, and indeed in those places too, if you can't find the colours that you want in my shop at the moment. Lovecrafts.com. They are brilliant when it comes to shipping worldwide. You can switch your country out depending on where you are on the site. So definitely have a look at that and they will ship worldwide. The other thing, love 'em or hate 'em, Amazon do sell Rowan Felted Tweed DK in lots of places around the world. So yes, love 'em or hate 'em, if you've got a Prime membership, yeah, you could well find that in your country on Amazon, easy to ship to you quite quickly as well. And there are large US stores, aside from Lovecrafts, and large UK stores as well. Just an example, Black Sheep Wools and woolwarehouse.co.uk both sell Rowan Felted Tweed DK, and I'm pretty sure both of them ship worldwide too. So that's definitely an option if you want to go and have a look at yarn elsewhere on the internet, so you can actually get it before we start knitting. And it's 3 balls of yarn. There will be leftovers too, so you can certainly knit up something with the leftovers. Now, if you're substituting yarn, remember we're looking for the gauge. Stitch is most important. Fibres can be really helpful to find too. Also the density of the fabric once you've knitted it up, so look at the length of the yarn, and we're also looking to make sure we're knitting with the same sized yarn. So it's DK 8-ply light number 3. The next thing is, where could you find help to substitute yarn? If you just, want to fit around a bit and see what you can find. So one of the best yarn substitution websites out there is called yarnsub.com. Very useful. Type the name into the top of the website and it will do its magic and find you a load of yarn that will match it, either very well or well. It will list it in order of how well the yarn matches. So this is really useful. And again, just make sure, I think the density is quite important because that's one thing that sometimes just gets mismatched. Everything else might seem fine, but if the density is wrong, then it's going to drape differently, it's going to feel different once you finish knitting. You'll wonder whether you want to wear it, quite possibly. So definitely look for that. You can also find reviews online. definitely go and have a look at that. Go and look in any forums or Facebook groups you're in and ask the question. There's no harm in asking the question, and then someone will say, don't use that one, definitely use that one. Someone said this is a great alternative, I'm really pleased with it. It will take you time, so it's just a case of having the patience and knowing that possibly this might be an alternative for you multiple times in the future. If you want to knit up Rowan DK patterns and you can't get hold of the felted tweed yourself, you may have an answer within 5 minutes, you just don't know. So it's definitely worth asking. So we've had a look at the whole range of things you need to be aware of when you're substituting yarn. Take a good look at the original, understand what it is that you need to find in a substitute, and then really, probably one of the best reasons to do this is because you've got yarn stash and you want to find an alternative. If you have handmade yarn in your stash, then make sure that it's a plain colour for this. When it comes to creating this effect, we do really want plain colours. And yes, the tweed is part of it, but the tweed effect is much less than you'd imagine it might be. But we need to find the effect of it being one colour, then another colour, then another colour. When yarn is hand dyed, the colour's changing too quickly for this many stitches, so you won't see the effect. That's certainly something to be aware of when you're thinking about substituting from your stash. So look for plain yarns, and you may well find DK yarns, and there could be a gauge. Just use a small amount of it to knit up a swatch if there isn't a gauge, and you'll know whether or not it matches the gauge on the felted tweed. The cart opens again today for the knit along. We move everyone into the knit along on the 1st of October, which means you've got until then. The digital pattern, you can go and find your own yarn, you can look in your stash, you can use leftovers, and like I said, the colourways are over there to give you some ideas and inspire you. But there are still 2 kits left if you like to dive in and get one of them. And we're knitting inside the knit along for 3 weeks. You've got Q&A in there, everything you need, all the tutorials. I will leave the link below for all the details of the knit along, and do hope I'll see you inside. Bye for now. Happy knitting.